The snow had begun at dawn, a slow sift of white across the silent hills, and by mid-morning it thickened into a storm that erased the line between earth and sky. Wind carried it sideways, bitter against bare skin, yet a man walked shirtless through the drifts, his broad shoulders steaming with the heat of his body. His hair, white as the snow itself, whipped about his scarred face. To the few travelers who glimpsed him from a distance, he seemed less man than phantom, a giant Apache ghost roaming the wilderness. He moved without hurry, each step heavy with memory, and when his lips parted it was only to mutter words carried away by the gale. "We are too old for love." Down in the valley, where the town huddled beneath its rooftops of sagging snow, a woman gathered kindling with stiffened hands. Isabella's hair, streaked silver-white though she was only 40, slipped loose from her bonnet and clung to her cheeks in strands of frost. She had once been proud of that hair when it first appeared, imagining it marked her with a kind of grace. But the town had found other names for her: ghost widow, curse-haired, barren witch. Gossip followed her like a second shadow. Today, as she stooped to gather wood, she heard 2 children giggle and whisper behind a fence. She straightened, cheeks burning, and felt the old ache of invisibility. Winter was cruel enough without the barbs of others. Her wagon stood at the edge of the frozen track, piled high with split logs. The right wheel, swollen with ice, cracked suddenly as she tried to haul it forward. The cart sank into the drift. Isabella pushed until her gloves tore and her breath rasped like smoke, but the wheel did not move. She pressed her forehead against the cold wood and let the sting of snow bite at her lashes. It seemed a small thing, just a broken wheel, but small things had a way of breaking her down these days. Loneliness made each burden twice as heavy. The crunch of boots in snow startled her. She looked up, and her breath caught. The giant Apache stood before her, his chest bare against the storm, muscles cut deep with scars that spoke of old battles. White hair brushed his shoulders like a crown of frost. For a heartbeat she thought the mountain itself had stepped forward, silent and immovable. She feared him, yes, for every tale she'd heard painted him savage, cursed, untamed. Yet there was something in his eyes, dark, downcast, ashamed, that struck deeper than any fear. He said nothing. He only crouched, placed his enormous hands beneath the timbered axle, and with one slow heave lifted the wagon clear of the snow. Muscles strained, scars pulled taut, breath smoked in great clouds, and then the wheel freed itself. He lowered the wagon as gently as if setting down a sleeping child. Isabella's lips parted to thank him, but the words died when she saw the way he turned his face aside, as though unworthy of her gaze. The storm howled between them, filling the silence. She found her voice at last, trembling. I would have been stranded." Still he gave no answer. He stepped back, snow clinging to the lines of his bare chest, his eyes shadowed by hair that glistened with ice. He looked not at her, but at the wheel he had freed, as though ashamed of even this kindness. Then he turned, shoulders hunched, and began to walk away into the storm. The snow swallowed him quickly, each step vanishing behind curtains of white. Isabella stood with her hands pressed to the wagon's edge, breath rising in pale ribbons. She should have been relieved. Yet instead a curious ache filled her, as though something precious had brushed past and slipped away before she could hold it. She wanted to call after him, but the old fear of town gossip choked her throat. What would they say if they saw her speaking with him? Still, her heart stirred with a warmth she had not felt in years. She climbed into the wagon seat and guided the mule forward, the wheel now rolling smooth. Her eyes searched the whiteness where he had disappeared, but the storm offered no trace. The road stretched lonely before her, winding toward the dim shape of the town. Her fingers trembled on the reins. The children's laughter still echoed in her ears, the whispers of women at church, the sharp words of merchants who refused to meet her eyes. All her life lately had been rejection. Yet in the eyes of that scarred stranger, she had glimpsed a reflection of her own shame. He bore it like she did, silently, with dignity worn thin but not broken. By the time she reached her cabin on the edge of town, night was settling heavy, and the fire she lit inside seemed too small to drive away the memory of his presence. She placed the logs on the hearth and watched them catch, sparks rising like stars. Her body shivered though the flames grew high. Outside, The storm battered the roof and moaned at the shutters. She sat in the glow, her silver hair unbound, and whispered to the empty room. "I've waited my whole life for something I've never known." Far beyond her cabin, where the hills bent into the wilderness, the Apache walked alone. Snow clung to his lashes, and the cold gnawed at bone, but he welcomed it. He believed it his penance to feel the bite of winter, to carry scars without warmth. He had lived through too many winters, buried too many companions, lost too many loves. Once he had been a warrior, proud, feared, but now he was little more than an aging shadow with hair gone white too soon. No tribe claimed him, no family called him home. He thought of the woman with silver hair and weary eyes, and his heart stirred against his will. He clenched his fists until the scars burned and muttered again to the storm. "We are too old for love." The night deepened. In her cabin, Isabella drew her shawl close, though the fire glowed bright. In the wilderness, he pressed onward, each step heavy with solitude. Both lay awake beneath the same storm, haunted by the same ache, neither knowing that the snow had already begun to weave their paths together. And when Isabella closed her eyes at last, she did not see the town's scorn or the children's laughter. She saw only the white-haired giant disappearing into the snow, and she felt her heart whisper back, daring to answer the silence. The snow did not ease in the days that followed. It pressed down upon the roofs of the town, muffled every sound, and turned each step into labor. For Isabella, the weight of it matched the weight of whispers that never seemed to melt away. She could not pass along the boardwalk without hearing a tongue cluck or seeing a hand drawn quickly to shield a smile. Her white hair, gleaming against the dark fabric of her bonnet, marked her like a lantern in fog. The townsfolk had grown accustomed to treating her as if she were both invisible and yet too visible at once. A curiosity. A reminder of what they feared becoming. Too old. Too alone. Too unwanted. That morning, she tried to haul a bundle of logs to her porch. The rope slipped from her numb hands, and the wood scattered, rolling into the drifts. She knelt, breath fogging, fingers stiff, willing herself not to weep. From the corner of her eye she saw figures pause on the street. Two women, Mabel and Coralie, known for gossip sharper than frost, whispered behind their shawls. "Poor ghost widow," one said, loud enough for Isabella to hear. "Too proud to beg, too barren to wed." Their laughter drifted across the snow like thorns. Isabella bowed her head lower, gathering the logs as if each were a stone laid upon her shoulders. Bootsteps approached, heavy, deliberate. She lifted her eyes, and her breath snagged. The Apache giant stood at the edge of her yard, hair white as hers, chest bare despite the storm, though this time a blanket hung loosely around his shoulders. He bent without a word and began stacking the scattered logs, his scarred hands moving with a gentleness that startled her. The women across the way gasped. One hissed, "Look at her, letting a savage into her yard." Another spat into the snow. Isabella's cheeks burned, shame knotting in her stomach, yet she did not move to stop him. Something in the way he lowered each log, precise, careful, felt like respect. Perhaps the only respect she had been given in years. When the work was done, he straightened, steam rising from his body in the cold. Their eyes met. She opened her mouth, fumbling for words, but the sound of gossipers' laughter rang louder. He turned as if to leave, shoulders slumping. "Wait," she whispered, and when he paused, she added, "Come inside. There's warmth." It was the first invitation she had given to anyone in months. The gossips would feast on it, she knew. Yet her voice did not falter. Inside, the cabin glowed faintly with firelight. Isabella ladled beans from a small pot into a tin bowl, placed cornbread beside it, and set it before him on the table. He sat stiffly, as though unaccustomed to such offerings. His hand lingered above the food before finally grasping the spoon. He ate slowly, every bite deliberate. Isabella watched the firelight play across the ridges of scars that ran like rivers over his chest and arms. They were not ugly to her. They were proof of survival. He noticed her gaze and shifted uneasily, lowering his eyes. The silence between them was heavy, but not hollow. It was filled with unspoken truths. Two lives worn by rejection. Two bodies carrying shame. Two souls too long denied simple kindness. At last he set the spoon down. His voice, when it came, was rough stone against steel. You should not let me stay. They will speak. She folded her hands in her lap, the bones of her knuckles pressing white against her skin. They already speak, she answered softly. Let them. His gaze flickered toward her then, surprised, as though he had expected her to recoil. Instead, she sat steady, silver hair unbound, eyes holding his without fear. For the first time in years, she felt no need to hide. The storm worsened by dusk. Wind shrieked against the shutters, snow hammered the roof. When Isabella reached for his empty bowl, her fingers brushed his. The contact jolted her, small but startling, like touching fire after long cold. She pulled back quickly, cheeks flushed, though her eyes lingered on his hands, scarred, wide, yet steady. He rose as if to leave, but the storm roared so fiercely that the door shook in its frame. She drew breath and said, Stay. The road will take you. He hesitated, torn between shame and survival, then nodded once. That night, he sat near the hearth while she mended a tear in his buckskin shirt. Her fingers moved carefully over the worn fabric, stitching with quiet focus. Each pass of the needle felt to her like mending not just cloth, but a fragment of what was broken inside them both. He watched her hands, the way silver strands of hair fell across her cheek. He wanted to speak, to thank her, but words caught like ice in his throat. Instead he spread more wood upon the fire. The flames leapt, shadows dancing over their faces. In the shifting light, they did not look like castaways of age. They looked like two souls still burning. The hours lengthened, the storm's fury beating at the walls. At one point, Isabella rose to secure the shutter, and the sight of her standing in firelight struck him. Her form outlined, hair shining white, eyes resolute. He had thought no woman could look at him again without contempt or fear. Yet she did. When she returned to the chair, she said nothing, only resumed her stitching. The silence felt alive, carrying warmth. Outside, the town was speaking. Mabel and Coralie had already carried tales to the tavern. Isabella had taken the savage into her house, fed him, kept him through the night. Men muttered over mugs of whiskey, women whispered at the church steps. Judgment gathered like snowdrifts, piling higher with each retelling. But inside the cabin, neither Isabella nor the Apache spoke of it. They were too intent on the small grace of sharing warmth, while the world howled outside. When the fire sank low, Isabella placed the mended shirt beside him. Their eyes met once more. She meant to say thank you, for the wood, for staying, for not letting her loneliness consume her, but her voice broke. Instead she simply nodded, and he inclined his head, as if understanding. He stretched upon the floor near the hearth, the blanket drawn over him. She lay in her narrow bed, facing the firelight. Sleep did not come quickly. Every creak of timber, every gust of wind reminded her of the storm beyond. Yet each breath she heard from the man on her floor steadied her heartbeat. Before her eyes closed, her lips moved in a whisper no one else could hear. I've waited my whole life for someone who would stay. The words trembled in the air, fragile yet fierce, and though he did not stir, she thought perhaps the rhythm of his breathing shifted, as though he too had heard and carried the weight of that longing into the storm of his dreams. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of silence and small gestures. Snow pressed heavy on the rooftops, the air brittle with cold, yet inside Isabella's cabin a fragile warmth began to take root. Each morning she found wood stacked higher at her door than she had chopped herself, and each evening, when she set food upon the table, the man across from her bowed his head before eating, though no prayer passed his lips. His presence unsettled her at first, not for fear of danger but for the ache it stirred, an ache of being seen after so long unseen. One night, when the fire burned low, he spoke more than a single sentence for the first time. His voice was low, gravel worn smooth by years of silence. You should know, he said, eyes fixed on the flames. I was once not a man people could welcome. His hand brushed absently across the scars on his chest, as though memory lived in each line. I rode with warriors. We fought, we burned, we took. And when the wars ended, there was no place for men like me. My people saw me as a shadow of old blood. The whites saw me only as enemy. So I walked away from both. Alone. He fell quiet, shoulders stiffening as though bracing for her recoil. Isabella's hands, folded in her lap, trembled slightly, but not from fear. She studied the profile of his face in firelight. The strong nose, the white hair framing eyes shadowed by regret. "And now?" she asked softly. His lips curved in something like a bitter smile. "Now I cut wood for a woman who offers bread. That is better than war." The humility in his words caught her unprepared, filling her with a strange, painful tenderness. She wanted to say that he deserved more than scraps of peace, but shame pressed the words back into her chest. She, too, carried her own story of rejection, and to speak of it felt like bearing wounds still raw. It was 2 nights later when her voice finally broke through. Snow rattled against the window, and she sat sewing by lantern light, her hair silver as the flames glow. Without lifting her eyes, she whispered, "I was married once. Younger than I should have been. He wanted sons. I could not give him any. The doctors said my body was closed, like winter soil. He called me barren, and his family called me curse. When he died, they pushed me out like rubbish. Since then—" her words faltered, but she forced them onward. "Since then I have lived as though I am half a person. Too old for love, too useless for work, too strange for company. That is what they say." Her throat tightened, but she lifted her eyes, daring to meet his. "Do you see why I understand your silence?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, his scarred hand resting on the edge of the table. He did not touch her, but the nearness carried weight. "You are not useless," he said simply. "You are fire in a storm. That is enough." Her breath caught, the words striking deeper than she expected. No man had spoken to her without scorn for years. She turned her face, hiding the sting of tears, and for the first time in a decade, she felt less alone. Yet outside their small refuge, the world had not turned kind. Gossip traveled faster than snowmelt. Mabel and Coralie spread tales that Isabella had given herself to a savage, that she was no better than heathen, that her silver hair marked her as unnatural. The whispers reached Sheriff Arlen Tate, who tried to warn her kindly. "The town won't forgive much, Isabella. You're already on their edge. Don't give them reason to shove you further." His eyes darted toward the woods, where the Apache's silhouette had been seen chopping. "That man brings trouble." Isabella only tightened her shawl and offered no answer. To defend him aloud would only confirm their suspicions. It was not gossip alone that threatened. One evening, as twilight bruised the snowfields, a figure on horseback appeared at her gate. Silas Boone, a rancher whose land pressed against hers, dismounted with the arrogance of a man who believed every acre he saw belonged to him. His coat was fine wool, his boots polished, yet his smile was jagged as broken glass. "Evenin', Isabella," he drawled. "Mighty cold for a lady to be keeping house alone. Seems a shame to waste such a place when a man like me could put it to better use." His eyes slid toward the cabin where firelight flickered. "Course, I hear you've found yourself company already. Big fella. Savage, ain't he?" Isabella's blood chilled, though not from the wind. She stepped onto the porch, spine stiff. "Whatever you've heard, Mr. Boone, this is my home. It will remain so." Boone's smile widened. "For now. But a woman alone can't hold land when wolves come sniffing. Sell to me, and I'll see you fed through winter. Refuse and, well, storms take lives every year. Folks won't blame me if yours does." He tipped his hat mockingly and swung back into the saddle. "Think on it, ghost widow. Snow can bury more than wood." His horse clattered away, hooves striking sparks on the frozen ground. Inside, Chenoa's eyes burned with restrained fury as she recounted Boone's words. "He threatens you because he thinks you have no shield," the Apache said, voice taut as a drawn bow. She met his gaze, her own voice trembling yet resolute. Then let him think wrong. For the first time, she saw his shame harden into something else, loyalty, fierce and protective. He rose, towering in the small room, and laid another log upon the fire with finality. "If he comes," he said, "he will not take what is yours." That night, the storm carried more than snow. A crash split the darkness, her barn door smashed open. She and Chenoa rushed into the cold, lantern light swinging wild. The door hung broken, splinters scattering across the drifts. Carved deep into the wood was a warning. A crude knife mark shaped like an X. Boone's men had left their message. The mule stamped nervously, breath steaming, eyes wide. Isabella clutched the lantern, its flame quivering in the wind. Fear tightened her chest, yet beside her stood the giant with white hair, his scars stark against the night. He looked at the mark, then at her, and his jaw set like stone. The storm howled around them, but in that moment Isabella felt another storm rising, one of judgment, threat, and looming violence. And though her heart trembled, a new thought flickered within. Perhaps shame was not the end of their story, but the beginning of something fiercer. The lantern light swayed, shadows cutting across his face, and in the silence he spoke only 4 words that chilled and steadied her at once. "They will come again." Morning came pale and brittle, the sky heavy with snow yet to fall. Isabella stepped outside to gather water, her shawl drawn tight, and found neighbors watching from the road. Their faces carried the same familiar disdain, but now it was sharpened with something new, accusation. One woman muttered, "There she is, playing house with a savage." Another added, "Her poor husband turns in his grave." Isabella lowered her eyes, heat burning her cheeks even in the cold. Shame weighed on her, but beneath it a strange steel began to rise. She was weary of shrinking beneath words that cut deeper than knives. Inside, Chenoa split wood in silence, every stroke of the axe ringing like judgment. His jaw clenched, his breath steady, but his eyes avoided hers. When at last he spoke, his voice was edged with sorrow. "They hate me, and because of me, they will turn on you. You will lose this place." She set the water down, her hands trembling with cold. "I have been losing pieces of myself for years," she whispered. "But not because of you." He turned then, eyes dark, haunted. "You deserve peace, not ruin." She stepped closer, her silver hair falling across her cheek, and her voice hardened. "Peace without dignity is no peace at all." That night, Boone returned with his men. They stood in the road, torches flickering, their laughter loud enough to wake every shuttered house in town. Isabella and Chenoa watched from the porch, the lantern between them casting a thin circle of light. Boone's voice carried, "You've made your choice, Isabella. You let the old savage stay, and now you'll pay the price. That land was never meant for you. I'll see you frozen before I let you keep it." He spat into the snow and raised his torch as if to ignite her fence. Chenoa stepped forward, bare-chested against the storm, his hair streaming white. The firelight painted his scars in copper and shadow. He said nothing at first, only stood, massive and silent, until even Boone's men shifted uneasily. Then his voice thundered low, a rumble beneath the howl of wind. "You will not touch her land." Boone sneered, but his eyes flickered with unease. "She hides behind you. What will she do when you're gone?" For a heartbeat, Isabella's fear surged. But then she felt something within her crack open like thawing ice. She stepped down onto the snow beside Chenoa, her shawl falling loose, her silver hair glimmering in torchlight. The gossips had always claimed she was cursed. Let them see the truth. She placed her hand on his scarred chest, her voice trembling but fierce. "I will not hide. Not from you, not from them. I've waited my whole life for someone who would stand with me. And I will stand with him." The words struck the men harder than any blade. Boone faltered, his smirk thinning. He gestured, and his men hurled the torches into the snow, flames sputtering. "This isn't over," he hissed, retreating into the dark. Their laughter faded with the hoofbeats, leaving only the storm. Isabella's hand lingered on Chenoa's chest a moment longer before she drew back, her heart hammering. He looked at her as though he had seen fire reborn, not in the hearth but in her eyes. Days passed, but the town's judgment grew crueler. Children threw snowballs at her door, shouting names. Women crossed the street to avoid her, muttering prayers as if warding off plague. Even Sheriff Tate, though more sympathetic, urged caution. "Boone has friends in high places," he warned. "If he presses the law, you won't have a chance." Isabella listened, her spine straightening with each word. "Then let him press," she answered quietly. "I am done living bent." Tate studied her, surprised by the resolve in her voice, and said no more. Inside the cabin, the storm of silence thickened. Chenoa sharpened his knife by the fire, his movements heavy with guilt. "You should send me away," he said finally. "I bring you nothing but scorn. You will starve alone if I stay." Isabella set down her sewing, her voice steady though her heart ached. "If you go, the scorn will remain. Only the warmth will be gone." He looked at her then, truly looked, and something in his face broke. Yet still he whispered, almost pleading, "We are too old for love." She leaned closer, her hand brushing his scarred knuckles, and answered, "No. We are old enough to know its worth." Her words seemed to bind them, but the test was not finished. Boone struck again, burning the pile of wood stacked high outside her cabin. Flames roared against the night sky, sparks scattering like angry stars. Isabella and Chenoa rushed out, the heat searing their faces. Neighbors watched from a distance, none daring to help. Boone's laughter echoed in the dark as he rode away, leaving destruction in his wake. Isabella fell to her knees in the snow, the heat of loss scorching her chest. Chenoa crouched beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his voice fierce. "He will not break you. Not while I breathe." She looked into his eyes and saw not shame, not regret, but a shield forged of loyalty. Together they worked through the night, salvaging what they could, their hands blistered, their breath ragged. At dawn, a new pile of wood stood, smaller but upright, a symbol more than a supply. Isabella brushed ash from her hair, her body trembling, but when she turned to the watching neighbors, she did not bow her head. Instead, she lifted her chin, her dignity shining brighter than the snow. That evening, as they sat by the hearth, silence stretched between them like a bridge newly built. Isabella laid her hand gently over his, the firelight warming their joined skin. Neither spoke, but in that quiet gesture lay a vow. Whatever came, they would not face it apart. The storm outside raged, rattling the shutters, but inside they held fast. The next night brought no rest. A knock pounded at the door, hard enough to shake the frame. Isabella's heart stilled. Chenoa rose, knife in hand, and opened it to reveal a boy, no more than 12, breathless and wide-eyed. "Boone's coming," the boy stammered. "With rifles. He means to take it all." The child fled into the snow, leaving the words hanging like smoke in the room. Isabella clutched the edge of the table, her breath quick and shallow. Chenoa closed the door slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to her, his voice steady as stone. "At dawn, it ends." The storm broke before dawn, wind screaming across the valley, snow flung sideways in sheets of white. Isabella woke to the sound of boots crunching outside, and the low murmur of voices carried by the wind. She rose, pulling her shawl close, and saw Chenoa standing at the window, his broad back lit by the glow of the hearth. His hair, white as the snow, caught the firelight like silver wire. He turned, scars stark against his bare chest, and in his eyes she saw no fear, only the heavy calm of a man who had faced death too many times to tremble now. "They are here," he said, his voice steady as stone. Her heart thudded painfully, yet when she stepped closer she found her voice did not falter. "Then we meet them." She tied her shawl tighter, though she knew no fabric could shield her from what waited beyond the door. His hand brushed hers briefly, the lightest touch, and for a breath she felt warmth stronger than fire. They stepped outside together. The world was a blur of white and flame, torches burning in the storm, men mounted on restless horses, rifles gleaming dark. Silas Boone sat tall at their center, his grin a jagged scar against the cold. "There she is," he called, his voice cutting through wind and snow. "The ghost widow and her pet savage. Step aside, Isabella. This land is mine now." Isabella felt every eye in the town upon her. Faces peered from shuttered windows, from doorways where whispers had once flourished. Shame pressed heavy, urging her to bow, but something inside her stiffened. She moved down the porch steps, her boots sinking in snow, until she stood at Chenoa's side. The torches painted her silver hair in firelight, and though her breath came fast, her voice carried clear. "This is my home," she said. "You will not take it." Boone laughed, ugly and harsh. "Your home? You were never meant to hold land. You were meant to wither alone. And you," his sneer cut toward Chenoa, "you should have died with your wars. Too old, too broken to fight. Look at you. White hair, scars, nothing left but a shadow." The insult cut deep, but Chenoa did not flinch. He stepped forward, bare feet crushing snow, towering in the torchlight. His voice rolled low, heavy with restrained fury. "I have buried more men than you have ever faced. If you cross this line, Boone, you will join them." The silence that followed was sharp as a blade. Even Boone's men shifted in their saddles, uneasy beneath the giant's gaze. Boone barked a laugh to cover his fear. He raised his rifle, the torchlight glinting off steel. "Then let's see if the old savage still has teeth." The world contracted to a breath. Snow whipped wild. Isabella's heart pounded like a drum. Boone leveled his gun, but before he could fire, Chenoa moved with sudden ferocity. He lunged forward, one scarred hand gripping the barrel, wrenching it upward as the shot split the storm. Sparks burst into the night, and the rifle clattered into snow. In the same motion, Chenoa struck Boone across the jaw, sending him sprawling from his horse into the drifts. Gasps broke from the watching crowd. Boone scrambled up, face twisted with rage, but before he could draw the knife at his belt, Chenoa planted a boot upon his chest, holding him down. The giant's breath steamed in heavy clouds, his eyes burning dark. "You are nothing," he said, voice thunderous yet calm. "You prey on the weak because you fear the strong. This land is hers. Touch it again, and I will end you." Boone's men hesitated, shifting uneasily. None moved to help him. The storm howled louder, filling the silence between heartbeats. At last Boone spat blood into the snow and shoved against the boot, but Chenoa did not yield. Isabella stepped forward then, her shawl whipping in the wind, her voice steady though her chest heaved. "Listen well," she said, facing the torches, the rifles, the watching town. "I have lived 40 winters bowed beneath shame, cast aside, called cursed, called barren, called ghost. Tonight I will bow no more. I would rather freeze in these drifts than give 1 inch of dignity to a man who seeks to steal it." The words rang through the storm, carrying a power that silence could not contain. Neighbors who had once whispered fell hushed, their faces pale in the torchlight. Even Boone's men lowered their rifles, unwilling to raise steel against such defiance. Boone himself squirmed, humiliated beneath Chenoa's weight, until at last he snarled and spat. "This isn't the end." Chenoa leaned close, his white hair falling across his face, his voice low but sharp as ice. "For you, Boone, it is." He stepped back, allowing him to rise. Boone staggered to his feet, rage burning, but no ally moved to his side. One by one, the men turned their horses, torches guttering as they disappeared into the snow. Boone cursed, stumbled after them, and vanished into the storm's white shroud. Silence fell heavy. Only the wind remained, rattling shutters, stirring drifts. Isabella stood trembling, not from fear now, but from the release of it. Her hand rose, brushing at the snow in her hair, though her eyes remained fixed on Chenoa. He turned toward her, scars etched deep in torchlight, chest heaving with the weight of battle not fought with blades but with resolve. The onlookers lingered, faces uncertain, but none spoke. Sheriff Tate stepped forward at last, his expression solemn. "Boone's claim is void," he declared. "This land is yours, Isabella. None will contest it again." His words carried to every doorway, every window, silencing gossip like a bell tolling. When the crowd thinned, when only the storm remained, Isabella turned to the giant beside her. Snow clung to his hair, his scars shone dark against pale skin. For a moment, shame flickered in his eyes, as though he still believed himself too old, too broken. She stepped closer, her voice breaking, tender as firelight. "You said we are too old for love," she whispered. "But I say we are old enough to know its worth." He stood still as though carved from stone, then slowly lowered his head. Her hand rose, resting against his chest where his heartbeat thundered. The world narrowed to the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers, the storm falling softer now, the silence no longer empty. His hand came to rest over hers, scarred and heavy yet gentle. In the glow of firelight from her cabin, in the hush of snow, they stood as two souls who had carried shame too long, now bound by dignity reclaimed. When at last his voice came, it was quiet, almost reverent. "I have walked many winters alone," he said. "I did not believe there was one left who could see me as more than a ghost." She lifted her face, silver hair clinging to her cheeks, eyes shining with unshed tears. "And I did not believe there was one left who could stay." They drew together then, the storm swirling around them, the town hidden behind shuttered windows, the fire of their joined hearts burning brighter than the torches that had come to extinguish them. For the first time in many winters, Isabella felt the weight of shame lift from her shoulders, replaced by something fierce, enduring, and alive. Later, when they stepped back inside, the fire crackled warm, casting light upon the walls. Isabella sank into the chair, her shawl slipping from her shoulders, and watched as Chenoa lowered himself by the hearth. His scars no longer seemed marks of ruin but of survival, his white hair no longer curse but crown. She whispered, almost to herself, "I have waited my whole life for you." And in that quiet room, as snow sealed the world outside, the old soul narrator would murmur to the listener, "Perhaps love does not bloom in the spring of youth, nor in the blaze of summer, but waits until the winters have taught us patience, until rejection has carved us hollow enough to be filled. Perhaps no heart is ever too old for love's fire, if it dares to burn against the storm."